Hello, everybody. My name is Conceição. I work at FaberMac. That, as some of you may know, we produce video games for the gambling industry. I would like to talk about something today. The talk is called The Sound of Numbers. And I'm here from Porto. I've studied at FEUP. And lately, I've been very interested in music, concerts. I've went to a lot of festivals lately. And not only that, as I work as FaberMac, combining both worlds, games and music, became something that I thought that would be interesting, and that's why I'm doing this talk. So let's talk about game sound. I will talk mainly about three themes. The first one is the history of game sound. The second one, game sound design concepts, some of them. And the last thing I'd like to talk about is sounds in FaberMac, how we produce them. So to start it, I'd like to go back in time to the 19th century. Why? Because in America, in the 19th century, there was a thing called penny arcades that were venues where people could go, and in exchange of a coin, they could play games like you do at fairs here in Portugal, for instance. But as you know, in America there are a lot of states, and in some states it's forbidden. It's against the law to gamble, and these machines were considered gambling. So what some companies did to circumvent the law was to create this machine here on the left, your left, that were machines that people could place a coin and they would hear music. And while they were listening to the music of the box, they could also play a game. So yeah, that's how they managed to stop calling these machines gamble machines. And this was the first time that music was implemented in games. And now let's go to the future, to the 70s. And I'll talk about game consoles. Why? The game consoles have generations. At the moment, we are at the 8th generation. And why consoles? Because with these generations, it's easier to talk about the improvements that were done in each one, comparing to, for instance, games produced into computers. Sorry. And this is the Magnavox Odyssey. This was the first console ever created. And actually, it didn't have a CPU. It didn't know who was winning and who was not. And it had no sound. For you to understand more or less how they played the game in this console, I'll show you the commercial of the console.
Magnavox presents Odyssey, the electronic game of the future. Odyssey easily attaches to any brand TV, black and white or color, to create a closed-circuit electronic playground. Odyssey gives you all the exciting action.
Did they say it's exciting? I don't know. But yeah, it's just a light going from one side to the other. But 3 years later appeared the Pong, the Atari Pong, and this is the first generation of consoles. As I've said, there are 8 at the moment. And in this, this became a success at the time. And yeah, it already had a CPU, it knew who was winning and who was not. It was called Pong. Why? I'll show you the gameplay. Some of you may already recognize it. Okay, so it's called Pong because it resembles ping pong. And also for another reason, because it took a long time to develop the console, but they decided to implement all the sounds that are on the console in Alpha Day. And while they were doing it, they realized, oh, this sounds like pong, pong, pong. Yeah, and that's why It's also called Pong. Then appeared second and third generation of consoles. The one on the left was my first console. But I'd like to talk mainly about this one, the third, the NES. Why? Because these consoles, mainly compared to the first one, they already had a sound chip that could produce the games, and it allowed a lot more quality while producing them for the developers. And these consoles have 4 or 5 channels, audio channels. What's an audio channel? It's an unique sound that can be produced at the same time. So the NES had 5, the Game Boy, the first Game Boy had 4, and they were very limited to the sounds that they could produce. In this example, taken from the first Game Boy, Nintendo Game Boy, it had 4 channels, 2 square waves, 1 triangular, and 1 noise. I'll show you an example of each one of these sounds. So the first one, square waves. So it's either on or off. That's a square wave. Second one is a triangular wave. And the last one is kind of weird. It's just noise. Okay, but developers have to create some interesting sounds for the game. So combining everything together in a fancy way, they managed to produce something like this. Okay, but still, each one of these sounds is very simple still. And music is not the only component of a video game. They also have to think about some other gameplay. While we do actions in video games, it's to create a sound. And that's something that they realized, maybe we should influence players in some way. And this game, the Space Invaders, was the first video game, where they decided to change the psychological mood of a player while they were playing it. I'll show you the example. Okay, so the tempo changes. The lesser aliens are on the screen. So it creates like an anxiety to the player. That's one way that they thought, changing the tempo can change the mood of the player. And then the 4th generation of consoles have appeared. They increased the number of channels, as you may see here. And each channel could produce more than a square or triangular or a noise. Each channel could produce any of them, and including samples. And the quality of sound became a lot better. Because they could use pianos or bass or other instruments in the video games, even though the memory that they had was very, very limited. But the main important development in the audio industry, in video games, came from the 6th to the 8th generation. Why? Because with the 6th generation, producing audio in music for video games was no longer limited to the hardware. They could produce sounds elsewhere, like on a PC, and then import it to the console. And this was really important because at this moment, producing sounds for video games was not limited to and the difficult part of producing them was not limited to the hardware. Was just the creative process of creating a sound. How can you create good sounds? So I'll show you an example of a video game. This belongs to the 8th generation of consoles. And you can see here in this video, I'm going to show you, that creating music for video games takes now a lot more budget to the teams that they create them. It's a lot better in quality. They even hire whole orchestras to create the sounds and music for video games, like shown here. as you may see, they hired an Academy Award-winning composer to write the songs for this video game. But video games are not only music, they also have a lot more components to it, as some of you that play video games know. So the game sound design team have to think about some other concepts about game sound design, and these concepts have other elements, music elements that are required to build those audio game sound design concepts. I'll talk about those concepts later. First, I'd like to talk about music elements that build those concepts. And first element I'd like to talk about is timbre. Why? Because timbre is basically the characteristic of a sound that enables us to identify the same song produced by two different instruments, and we still can recognize which instrument it is. So I'll show you two sounds, and you will easily understand that they are produced by two different instruments. So it's the same music in both examples, but we still see the difference. The first one was a flute, and the second one was a cello. Okay, so in video games, this is also used. Why? Because timbre is what enables us to say that one sound is dark, is mellow, is joyful, is warm, cold, or metallic. And I'll show you an example of a small gameplay of a video game that some of you may recognize. And one of these elements that I've talked about, you'll easily understand that it's used in this video game. Yeah, you can understand that rings are metallic easily. Okay, the second element I'd like to talk about is basic music element. The first one was timbre. The second one is dynamics. What's dynamic? Dynamic is the variation of loudness of a sound, and it can go from piano forte. I don't know if the acoustics of the room enables you to see that one was quieter and the second one was louder. So, and variation of loudness, if it goes from forte to piano, is a decrescendo. The other way around is crescendo. Crescendo is used in video games as in this example. Okay, by the way, this is a horror game. Okay, so there's a monster coming for a player, and the sound gets louder and louder and louder to scare the player. Okay, so I've talked about timbre, dynamics, and third music element I'd like to talk about is pitch, that it's the human ear perception of a frequency. In nature, frequencies are not pure. So the louder the pitch, the higher the pitch, the higher the frequency, and the lower the pitch, the lower the frequency. And by the way, the human ear can hear frequencies from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. As I've said, pure frequencies in nature do not exist. But I will still show you some examples of frequency. Okay, I'm sorry. I know this was painful. And as I said, usually any sound we hear has a lot of frequencies, a whole spectrum of frequencies. And I'll show you an example of a sound. I would like to tell you which name music is, but I can talk Latin, so But yeah, this was a piece of music with all the frequencies that it has. With the technology we have today, we can limit the frequencies. I'll show you the same song, but with the higher frequencies filtered. Okay, and now the other way around, the lower frequency is limited. And this is also used in video games by game sound designers, and I'll show you how just in a minute, because first I'd like to talk about one concept called immersion, that is the experience of taking a player and making him feel like he's actually there in the video game. To accomplish that, there are some game sound design concepts that are used. I'll talk about 4 of them. And first, I'd like to talk about is equalization. Equalization is limiting the frequencies that are used in a sound, like I've shown you before. And one of the ways that they can use equalization in video games is by giving the player the feeling that one sound is closer or further away from the player based only on the frequencies that are given to the player. I'll show you an example. Second one, I've taken out the high frequencies, and it seems like the sound is further away than what it actually is. The second game sound design concept I'd like to talk about is attenuation. Why attenuation? Attenuation is the process of giving the player a louder sound the closer it is to the player. I'll show you an example. Okay, the first explosion was closer to the player, so the sound was louder, and second one was further from the player, so it was quieter. This is pretty simple. Attenuation is very basic. The third music element I'd like to talk about is echolocation. Why? Echolocation is basically giving the player a feeling of where the sound comes from. In this example, I'll show you a player is actually legally blind, but thanks to echolocation, he still manages to play the game. Okay. And the fourth sound design concept I'd like to talk about is reverb. Reverb is basically is created when a sound wave collides and reflects in a surface or in the environment. It creates like an echo. I'll show you 2 examples. On the first one, I think that just by the sound you can hear the car getting inside a tunnel. Okay, this room creates a very loud sound. And second one, you can hear someone firing a gun and hearing the same sound reflected throughout time on a canyon. So, but those game sound design concepts are really important to create some immersion. But video games should also give a feeling of reward to the player. And to do that, there's player feedback that basically tells the player if he's doing well or not. I'll show you an example of positive feedback given to the player. Okay, so you can clearly hear a joyful sound. Not only that, the sound goes higher in pitch. and comparing with a negative feedback sound. So totally different sounds. And okay, as I've said before, I work at Fabamac. We produce games for the gambling industry. And obviously, you want players to be engaged in your games. To accomplish that, I think you can understand that we use mainly positive feedback sounds. I'll show you now an example of a sound, a background sound recorded in a casino in Las Vegas. Okay, first of all, let's hear it and I'll talk about it. Okay, so you can hear a lot of noise. You can hear people talking, and you can also hear some bells in the background. Okay, so bells are usually produced by some metallic instruments, and those are sounds that pierce through the background noise of the casino. Not only bells, but like explosions, people clapping. Some high frequencies enables us to understand that one sound is actually coming from a gambling machine. As I've shown before, there are also some other techniques that tells a player that is in a casino and playing a gambling machine. But first I'd like to talk about games that Fabamac produces. Okay, at Fabamac we produce some types of games. The two main ones are bingos and slots. And I'll show you an example of bingos. Bingos are produced for a lot of markets, like the Philippines, Mexico, Spain, or Ireland. Those markets can share one bingo, so they must be really generic, the sound that it produces. So I'll show you one example of a gameplay of a bingo from Fabamac. Okay, so the sound you hear here is not automatic, is very generic. It's just someone from a colleague of us on a audio studio shouting bingo, 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 and it's really generic. On the other hand, slots are aimed for some specific markets, and they can be really generic, very thematic. And here's an example of the Okay, I think that you can take an Egyptian vibe to the sound that was produced. When compared to the bingo, that was really generic. And here's another example. You can probably hear an 80s vibe to the sound. So these are games that you can play in machines, in gambling machines for Fabamac. It's called land-based. They are in casinos around the world. But Fabamac is now applying a lot of effort into producing games for the online market. And the online market is really different. As I said before, to the gambling industry, the sounds are really sharp. They have high frequencies just to create, to call for the players around someone to go to there. Some jackpots and bonus are really loud. But while playing online, that cannot exist. Sounds cannot be annoying, they can't be stressful for the player, because in our smartphones you can just shut down the volume. You can shut down the volume, and you don't want that. So the sound must be really more relaxing, and we can't use so many bells and sounds that irritate us in some way. So the creative process right now, it's really iterative. So we produce sounds, we hear them and see if they are annoying, and then if they are, we go back and change it. So yeah, this was the presentation. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that if you go to a casino and hear a sound, I hope if you like it, it's created by FaberMac.